Terrifier 3 is one of the most anticipated horror films of 2024 and certainly the most anticipated independent horror film since 2022, when Terrifier 2 caught everyone by surprise by adding interesting characters, a well-crafted plot, and a fascinating mythology to the sickening gore the first installment in the series was known for. After rewatching All Hallows Eve, the anthology that introduced Art the Clown, and the first two movies in the series, I have noticed a few subtle clues that I haven't seen anyone talking about on the web, and I might have a theory about where the overarching story is headed that I want to share with you. For those of you who haven't seen the three movies I mentioned, I must warn you that there will be major spoilers from now on. For everyone else who has seen them and can't wait to know where Sienna's and Jonathan's story is headed, make sure to watch until the end for the theory. I have a love-hate relationship with the Terrifier franchise. More precisely, I have an attraction-aversion relationship with it. I'll start with the reasons for my aversion. Art the Clown disturbs me. I have found many scenes in the franchise sickening and vile beyond measure. I know you might be wondering what the heck I'm doing with a horror-themed channel if I can't stand high levels of gore, but let me tell you, it's not the gore that disturbs me. Well, I'll admit Ali's death scene in Terrifier 2 was too much even for me. But what truly causes the aversion I mentioned earlier is the fact that Art doesn't only revel in provoking terror in his victims and in destroying their bodies with torture and mutilation. He enjoys humiliating them and delights in defiling everything that is pure and sacred in this world. Seeing Ali's mother encountering the disfigured beyond recognition body of her daughter and the demon responsible laughing in her face only to later kill her as well, luckily off screen, was perhaps worse than the infamous bedroom scene because it's the epitome of Art's unfathomable cruelty and malevolence towards family, innocence and love. This is the reason why I feel repulsed by Art the Clown, and at the same time cannot deny that he is the greatest horror movie villain ever created. I know, we've been gifted with amazing baddies throughout the history of cinema, but I have very good reasons to build this argument on, and I will get into details in a video I have planned for the near future. But to stay on point, the attraction part of my relationship with the Terrifier franchise relies on the hypnotic magnetism of this incredibly sadistic monster, as well as on the craftsmanship of Damien Leone as a creator, and I'm using the word creator instead of director on purpose here. Not only is he responsible for most of the practical effects in his films, but he has shown a keen sense for gritty aesthetics and effective pacing. What I find truly remarkable, though, is that he also crafted a very engaging mythology. I belong to the fringe of people who gets deeply involved with complex narrative mythologies as background for stories. Call it a penchant for the fantasy genre, but intelligent world building adds a great deal of enjoyment when I experience stories, regardless of the medium in question, and I'm sure those familiar with George R.R. Martin's books understand what I mean. In my opinion, Damien Leone has done a great job in crafting an interesting mythology for this franchise, and in peppering the movies with subtle clues as to what might be going on in the background. I suppose many people are far more interested in the senseless acts of violence portrayed on screen, but to me, the mythology adds great depth to the story. Besides, some little nudges in interviews with both Damien Leone and David Howard Thornton make me think there might be a greater morality message behind this than most realize, and that it will become clear only with the franchise's conclusion. The Terrifier story is, at its core, a battle of good versus evil, and despite the obvious iconography of sword-bearing angels versus grotesque demons, I think the kind of evil Leone wants to speak about is how violence begets trauma, which itself begets more violence, and so on and so forth. Trauma itself is the basis of the theory I want to talk to you about. You see, violence is, except for rare situations, a voluntary act, and great violence does not uniquely cause physical wounds, but psychological ones as well, that we refer to as trauma. Even though it has become common knowledge in relatively recent times, human history-wise, this type of damage can be viewed as an intangible thing that produces very tangible results through the actions of its bearers. And here lies the simple but yet powerful fact that was only suggested in Terrifier 1 and 2, but that could possibly be a major driving force for the plot of Terrifier 3. Powerful trauma can make people do either exceptionally bad or exceptionally good things, depending on how we choose to handle it. A major physical wound, severe trauma, can probably never be erased completely, and its effects, identified with the medical term post-traumatic stress disorder, can be mitigated and managed through psychological and pharmaceutical therapy, but not fully cancelled. An untreated or improperly treated physical wound can fester and threaten the person's life, but the equivalent neglect or maltreatment of a psychological one can equally yield a dangerous byproduct, violence. Only this byproduct is dangerous for others as well. I sincerely hope no one thinks I am trivializing such a critical topic or mathematically equating trauma with violence inflicted upon others, but I think there is ample evidence that on a scale of violence, higher levels mean higher probabilities that the receiver will develop antisocial tendencies. I also think that society as a whole still hasn't fully woken up to how paramount it is to provide adequate help and care in this direction. Despite my personal beliefs, these mechanics are particularly manifest in the character of Victoria Hayes. She is a tragic character because at the end of the first movie she was terrified and left disfigured by a human monster who also murdered her sister. After a year of rehabilitation, she probably thought being interviewed in Monica Brown's talk show and letting the whole world see her outer appearance would be an opportunity for acceptance and healing. Unfortunately, the exploitative questions and behind-the-scenes mockery and contempt of the cynical TV host made her snap and inflict horrible violence on her. On the surface, it could look merely like another ugly and disturbing event in a film brimming with them, but this is a pivotal and thematic moment, in my opinion, that will inform at least some of the events in Terrifier 3, and that leads us to the little pale girl. We know that she is the personification of the demon responsible for Art's resurrection and newfound supernatural abilities, and we also know that she has taken the physical appearance of Art's first victim, Emily Crane, who, according to the article clippings in Sienna's and Jonathan's father's art book, was the daughter of a couple of famous circus performers. Her mangled body was found in a makeup trailer just outside the main event grounds. The first conjecture in my theory is that the demon didn't simply take Emily's appearance, it actually revived her corpse and took hold of it, which a certain disgusting shot where she relieves herself on the laundromat's floor would confirm. Putrid liquid wasn't made of excrements, but mostly of decomposition-related matter. I know this apparently conflicts with the fact that she can be seen only by Sienna and Jonathan, but is it really that far-fetched to imagine that a supernatural being with supernatural powers could glamour people into not seeing it? Obviously, using a dead body will limit its physical agency, and that's why, at the end of Terrifier 2, we see the same faintly glowing yellow eyes in Victoria, who has now become a new vessel for the demon, who wants to be more hands-on in the downfall of Sienna and in preventing its own demise. The demon knows about Sienna's status as chosen by a higher power, and it wants to kill her. That's why it chose to resurrect Art twice in a row, and that's why almost everyone related to Sienna has been killed, in order to break her psychologically and spiritually. I believe there is much more going on behind Sienna's and Jonathan's father's death than meets the eye. First of all, I must regrettably turn down the popular theory that Art is their father. It's a somewhat cool idea, but there are too many things conflicting with it, the most glaring of which are him leaving behind an art book to help Sienna defeat himself, and no one recognizing him despite the heavy makeup. It simply doesn't add up. I think the demon, which appears for the first time in Damien Leone's short film Ninth Circle, and you can see here, has long been in the director's mind as the true antagonist, with Art acting like its minion. I mean, Art is of course the most charismatic villain, but I think the duo's relationship is somewhat akin to Darth Vader and Palpatine. The only aspect that we'll probably never see is Art's rebellion against its master, because their goals are too greatly in harmony. Art wants to cause terror and suffering on anyone who dares or simply happens to cross his path, and the demon wants to feed on the trauma inflicted by Art. More precisely, the demon is a personification of trauma and can manifest itself in the physical world only in two ways: by possessing corpses or by possessing heavily traumatized people. And on this note, the easiest ones to possess are those who have given in to violence, like Victoria Hayes. I expect Victoria to entirely replace the little pale girl in Terrifier 3, and the fact that actress Emily McLean is nowhere to be found in the IMDb cast page seems to confirm this. One small detail I rarely, if ever, see discussed is a particular shot when Jonathan wakes up inside the Terrifier. The little pale girl turns around to look at him, and she is sporting the exact same face as Victoria, which suggests the demon was already working on a contingency plan to possess Victoria in case Art failed to defeat Sienna. Also, something I have not heard about anywhere, and that supports my theory, is that fact that in the mid-credits scene, when the nurse approaches Victoria's cell, a voice can be heard yelling obscenities. I checked several times and I can confidently say that it's not Victoria's voice, but the voice of the TV show host in the Clown Cafe dream sequence, the one talking about art cereals and all the awful stuff in it. I believe this is the real voice of the demon, and that's why we never see its face in the dream. Besides, the Clown Cafe dream could be saying a lot more than commonly believed about Art's past, as well as what truly happened with Sienna's death, but I'll get to that in a minute. The entire sequence, as openly confirmed by Damien Leone, acts as a divine test for Sienna, and it's not a mere dream, it's a real place in hell, but I theorize it's a specific chamber of hell that collects Art's memories and malice. Some people have suggested that the man begging for money next to a nun is Art, but I think it's a bit of a misdirection. In my opinion, the entire scene is a collection of elements that contributed to Art becoming a monster. I am perfectly aware of the theory that for a horror villain to be effective, it's best not to humanize them. It's best to show as little as possible about their origins, because a truly great horror villain should elicit fear, and knowing they were victims themselves to begin with would elicit empathy as well and diminish the fear factor. Damien Leone knows this and has stated in interviews that he is conflicted about showing too much about Art's past, lest he ruins a great monster, so it's very possible we'll never get to see scenes from his past. But here's my full theory. The traveling circus and Luna Park where Art grew up was an awful, awful place where he, probably an orphan, was subjected since infancy to a bottomless pit of sexual, emotional, psychological and physical abuse, as well as complete neglect and destitution. I think the beggar symbolizes his abject poverty and hardships. The cereals represent Art's childhood, and the glass, insects and razor blades within represent the way he was tortured in his childhood. The adults dressed and acting like dumb, spoiled children represent the indifference of society, who only cared for entertainment. The demon's voice represents the way it groomed Art for years to become its champion. Because you see, Art represents another possible expression of trauma. I suppose it's possible that extreme and repeated trauma without any kind of support or help can completely erase any remnant of humanity or shred of empathy within an individual. I think Art represents a somehow inverted transcendence through unconceivable suffering, humiliation and abuse. And there is one thing that strongly suggests that: his complete lack of speech. There are many studies that show how abused children often display speech development problems. As for how events unfolded, I suspect Sienna's father was an artist whose primary occupation was costume and props design, and due to being asked to supply the circus, he witnessed Art's murdering Emily Crane and barely escaped himself, but with great psychological consequences. Out of shame for not being able to save the little girl, he did not tell his family, but due to the trauma, the demon tried repeatedly to possess him. He resisted up until developing a brain tumor and ultimately committing suicide to avoid being possessed. But before that, he was shown visions from a higher power that rewarded him for his defiance of evil and told him his daughter was destined to defeat the demon. A little side note, I think the abandoned Luna Park and circus are truly cursed, and those who passed through it when it was still on are cursed as well, hence the psychiatric nurse played by famous YouTuber Leah Voisey showing up in a dream and singing the Clown Cafe song with no recollection of where she heard it. A second little side note, the zombie brain platter is a nifty little hint at what will happen to Chris Jericho's character's head at the beginning of Terrifier 3. Back to Sienna's dad, his feats of anger and abuse during his last months were caused by the demon attempts to possess him, and this is what qualifies Sienna as the true opponent of evil. Despite the abuse, she managed to still love her dad and being a kind person towards others. That's why, for a brief moment in Terrifier 2, the news anchor speaks directly to her and compares her to Victoria. Victoria is a distorted version of Sienna who embraced violence to subjugate the pain. And this brings me to the most painful realization. I have a strong feeling that Jonathan, a character that I really like, much like Sienna, will have to deal with trauma during the third movie. But while Sienna will manage to exorcise the pain and develop new strength and resolution by finding someone to care for, protect, most likely her young cousin, I think Jonathan, as the only other surviving victim of Art, I don't think Brooke's boyfriend could survive those wounds and has probably bled to death, will deal with trauma differently. I suspect he will be bullied by someone and he will eventually give in to violence and open the door for the demon to possess him when Victoria is no longer useful. This has been foreshadowed in T2 by two events. Jonathan wanted to dress like Art for Halloween, and he was thrown the dead possum by Art, which could act as a form of knighting. I also strongly believe that Barbara was doomed when she chose to ignore Jonathan's pleas. She did not show compassion and empathy towards him, and that's also what the young man will have to deal with in the third movie. I think that last memory and the idea that he could be responsible for his mother's death will be major factors in his character's arc, which I doubt Leone will waste by simply making him cannon fodder for the demon clown, given how talented Elliot Fulham is. I also expect that either in the end of the third movie or in a fourth installment, Sienna will have to face the horrible choice of killing her brother to save her little cousin. If you enjoyed this video, I suggest watching this other one about how Alien Romulus could save the franchise. Thank you all so much for watching. Have a great day and see you in the next one.